Good evening, everyone. I hope I'm hearable in other rooms. I'm really sorry for the delay. We try to keep this as quick as possible, so I'm just going to get right into the briefing. Welcome to tonight's debate. The motion tonight is this House believes that class runs Britain. And by class, we're talking about the class system, the class structure, but I will leave the proposition to define the motion more clearly and encourage them to. Speakers tonight have 10 minutes to speak. Their first and last minutes are protected, so in those minutes, don't interrupt them, please. Just let them go. But in the middle 8 minutes, you can step in and you can interrupt with a point of information. So stand up and shout loudly so they can hear you. Point of information, or on that point, or something to that effect, and get their attention. They will either look to you and say, go ahead, or indicate that they'd like to take the point, at which point, please wait for a microphone to reach you. Or they might ignore you or ask you to sit down. If the speaker does not take your point, please respect them. We understand it's a debate. We encourage some back and forth. However, it's their 10 minutes. Some speakers have come a very long way to speak for only 10 minutes. So please do respect their choice if they would like to continue speaking. Now, if at any point in tonight's debate, you as a member of the audience do want to speak, wait for a microphone to reach you. Because you see how packed this room is. People in other rooms are watching this debate live right now. And if you're not speaking into a microphone, they can't hear you. And they've also come, some people a long way, some people have given up quite a lot of work to come here tonight. So please do wait for the microphone to reach you. If you're going to speak as well, please start with your name and college. I think that's most of the housekeeping reminders. The only final thing is if you're in an overflow room, so this isn't really to the people in this room, but to the people in the other rooms, and you'd like to make a point from the floor, you can tweet at me at Cambridge Union Society, or is it at Cambridge Union? I'm sorry, it's at Cambridge Union, with hashtag PIP if it's point in proposition, PIO, point in opposition, or PIA, point in abstention. And if there are a lot of floor speeches from other rooms and not from in here, then I'll read out a couple during the rounds of floor speeches. So on that note, we've got 4 speakers first, then we'll have the floor speeches, as with the normal debates, and then we'll close off with the final 2 speakers. So, without any further ado, to open tonight's debate, we have Professor Daniel Dorling, who is a geographer. I will let him introduce himself the rest of the way. Daniel.
Thank you very much, and good evening. I'd like to propose the motion. And the reason I'd like to propose the motion is very simple. You should vote for it because you're not stupid. You all know in your heart of hearts that class matters in Britain. You know it because you worry about what you wear, you worry about how you talk, you worry about what people think about you. None of you wants to be considered a toff or a chav or a working class hero who's got a chip on their shoulder or a chinless wonder, or any of the other insults that we could start to lay out on you. You all want to be valued for what you can contribute and what you can do, but in Britain, where you come from matters much more at the moment than where you're going. When we say that class runs Britain, we're not talking about a cabal of people who meet on a yacht. Occasionally people do end up meeting by accident in Tuscany all on yachts, but that isn't how class runs Britain. What we're talking about is how life chances are so determined by your social class, but much more than this, or at least what I'm talking about. My other proposers will talk, I suspect, differently, and on other aspects that mean you should vote for this, about how everyday behaviour is changed by the kind of class system we happen to live in this country, which is an unusual system, which is much stronger than most rich countries have. It changes who we are and how we behave, and it results in class or class being so important. I'll explain in a minute my pronunciation. It's rather like race in the USA, except a little bit deeper and a bit more important. Other things matter. Being male or female matters. Less so than it used to, but it still makes a huge difference. However, Margaret Thatcher would not have become Prime Minister, I think, if she hadn't married into wealth and into the right class. Geography matters. I'm a geographer, so I would say that, but the reason why I say class is that for 10 years I lived in Newcastle upon Tyne. You have to be a complete idiot to live for 10 years in Newcastle upon Tyne and not end up saying Bath and class and other things. You have to be a very arrogant person to do it. So please excuse my pronunciation. It's not the Oxfordshire I grew up with. I'm not going to shower you with statistics. One reason I'm not going to do this, apart from the fact that it's quite boring to be showered with statistics, is that as far as I can see, I don't get a right to reply, so my opponents could rubbish my stats, and I don't get to tell you why they're so wonderful. But also, this isn't really about statistics. It's about gut feeling about things that you know. My favourite gut feeling on this comes from George Orwell, that wonderful old Etonian, and his realisation that class mattered. And he only realised that class mattered in 1936, when during the Spanish Civil War he turned up in Barcelona. And it's an often repeated quote, that for the first time waiters looked him in the eye and people began to treat him as equals. And he suddenly realised what he'd been living through in England. Now, one of the difficulties of making this debate about class running Britain is that you're used to it, so it doesn't feel like it is happening. And I can't transport you to 1936 in Barcelona. But you have to use your imagination. But you are imaginative. So you can, I think, do this. In 1936, Britain was incredibly unequal in terms of income inequality. I'm trying to avoid statistics. We're now as unequal as we last were in 1936 again. We've become as unequal in terms of what the richest 1% have. We've lived very different lives depending on the class that we have been brought up in. And it probably is obvious to you by now, I have never done this before. I have never spoken in a debate before. I went to an average school. Most schools, they don't do debates. I went to, well, a slightly posh university, but again, didn't have somewhere like this that did this kind of thing. I've never done it before. The first time I've shook hands with somebody in my life, I was 18 years old, and somebody stood in front of me and put their hand out. And I thought, what's going on here? The realisation, this is how class matters. I can remember being bullied as a child growing up in Oxford because I shouted, hey, when you should have shouted, oi. It's there, it's pervasive. You should feel it. If you don't feel it, well, you'll be happy, but you really aren't living in the real world. And it's going to last you for the rest of your life. A bit more serious about why class matters. You have a wonderful academic here in your Faculty of Education called Diane Ray, R-E-A-Y, very good to look up, who explains in a paper just published a few days ago about how in Britain, unlike any other country in the OECD apart from Chile, we spend 25% of our secondary education budget, private and public, on private schools because class matters. You get showered with statistics about this. The Sutton Trust produced some of the best ones. The Sutton Trust tell you, it's brilliant, people are very egotistical. The Sutton Trust write to top people, High Court judges, Vice Chancellors, and say, would you tell us about your background and your school? Because we're interested in you. And they write back. So we know that at the top of society, all the top jobs are so dominated by people from a very narrow margin. The most narrow group of people are High Court judges. They come from the most exclusive set of backgrounds. The least narrow are university vice-chancellors. And it always makes university vice-chancellors happy when you tell them they're the most socially diverse. But they're still almost all from private or grammar schools, and it's not just their age why that happens. A lovely book which explains why class matters is Lady Chatterley's Lover. Lady Chatterley's Lover was written at a time when class really mattered. It really mattered so much that it couldn't be published. It was published at a time when class began to matter less. Although some judge could still say, is this a book you would like your servants and your wife to read? We're again moving back in terms of the gaps between us, the wealth and income gaps, and who's in charge of us and their backgrounds. All of our prime ministers have either been privately educated or grammar school educated. The only exception is Gordon Brown, and he was hothoused in a special little part of his school where you're shoved forward 2 years, which he says was not good for him either. It's a very divided society. But I'm going to begin to wind up by telling you how I got to see class mattered. And Unfortunately, it's not very good for the planet if you copy what I did, but it's the only way I can be honest with you. I didn't get to go to the Spanish Civil War in 1936 and see people behave differently. A few years ago, I got to go to New Zealand and work there for about 4 months. And after 3 months, and it took 3 months because I was so used to things here, I began to notice something. What I noticed was, we were listening to the radio in the evening, because I'm properly middle class now, we were listening to the Today programme, which in New Zealand is in the evening. And I couldn't anymore tell the difference between most of the politicians by the way they spoke. They all spoke the same. Now this is being unfair to some, and I know we're going to be wrapped up by a politician. But 3 months in New Zealand, basically a working class culture, it took me to suddenly realise how much class runs Britain. The real question was, you went to Oxford or Cambridge, largely to Oxford. You did PPE. Were you slightly less rich or slightly more rich? But it really was a very similar group of people that you're in. I could accept losing this debate. I hope my other proposers are better than me and we don't lose the debate, because I really think you should shine and show that you understand that it's not just that class matters, but it matters so much that it is worth supporting the argument that it runs Britain. My excuse, if I were to lose it, would be that you haven't been lucky enough to have gone outside, to have talked to people from other countries, talked to people from Ireland, talked to people from France and Germany, where people don't send their children to separate schools. You haven't lived largely outside of this system, so you're imbued in it. And to you it feels normal, so it doesn't seem as if it's something strange. I'm on to my last minute. Thank you very much for not interrupting me, as I'm fairly nervous at doing this kind of thing. The power of classes is all pervasive. You've really got to step back and think, who's in charge? Where did they go to university? What families did they come from? It's not their fault. The principal reason why class runs Britain is that for 1,000 years we have not had a decent revolution or been invaded. The reason why other countries are far more equitable is largely because something fairly awful happened to them. It's not people's fault that we're in this position. I'm going to end, perhaps in a silly way, because you're going to start knocking me, but I'm going to end with a quote, because I'm an academic and we are supposed to end on quotes and to do these things. But my quote is slightly odd. It's from, you won't know him, I'm looking at you and you're far too young, but Tupac Shakur is my quote. And I'm going to bastardise it slightly. But in the immortal words of Tupac Shakur, that's just it. For now, that's just the way it is. I propose the motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Before I introduce the next speaker, I think this is a great opportunity for us all to turn off our cell phones and put them away. Because if you do want photos or video, well, you can't take them. No, we are taking photos, we're taking a video, this is all going to go up on YouTube. So this is a great time to just silence your phone or put them away so we don't interrupt further speakers. While you're doing that, I will introduce the next speaker is Dr. SAIF Abed, who is a physician studying for his MPhil at the Judge Business School and runs his own management consultancy firm. SAIF, you have 10 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my duty and my purpose today to deconstruct and derail the falsehoods of the arguments of the proposition. Ladies and gentlemen, I beseech you, I implore you, do not be deceived by the smoke and mirrors of party politics when it comes to discussing class. I'm going to address this issue by posing 3 of my own questions and answering them one by one. First of all, what does it mean to be ruled in Britain in the 21st century? Secondly, what does it mean? What does class mean in 21st century Britain? And then, if you believe as I do that class is not the number one overruling So, without further ado, I'll get going. So what does it mean to rule or to run in Great Britain in the 21st century? Well, really, to answer that question, what we need to address are who are this perceived ruling class that we now have? Is it the Queen? Is it the Prime Minister? Is it maybe the people who govern the World Wide Web? Or maybe even it's those who sit in the dragon's den? I'll tell you this. I am not in servitude to anyone. I am no longer the man who merely tends the land and cannot own it. I can own it now. I have the opportunity, and I can own it many times over. The opportunities are there, ladies and gentlemen. But I will admit this. I am a slave to society, ladies and gentlemen. The shoes that I wear, the coffee we drink in the morning, the place I choose to apply to have my education. That is all according to the fashion and the fads and the pressure of society. It is society which rules Britain. It is society which rules the choices that I make, and not class. But I will get to this with my next point. You see, this is a very smooth and elegant, I feel, transition to my next point, which is, what is class in the 21st century, ladies and gentlemen? Is it the thought of a bygone era where we have a landed gentry, or perhaps we have the bourgeoisie and the proletariat? Well, I've already touched on this, ladies and gentlemen. I can tend the land, but I can now own it. Social mobility exists. It's by no means perfect, and let's not get confused. The purpose of this debate isn't about whether class exists, or whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, or whether it is a factor in social mobility. It is. We'd be ignorant to say not to. But is it the factor that runs and rules Britain when it comes to so many factors, and particularly social mobility? But let's get back to the point. I discussed society. To discuss society, we then need to look at the people who influence society and the composition in terms of class of this concept of society. So I'll give you some examples. So the most lucrative artist in the world right now, Damien Hirst, working class. The most influential global fashion designer, Alexander McQueen, working class. Whether you choose to accept it or not, Cheryl Cole, she influences the teenage demographic, working class, not just yet. Going on from there, I would say Max Clifford, influencing the media, working class. Danny Boyle, working class. Oh, have any of you got one of these? It's iPhone, iPod, anything thereof, one of the greatest cultural phenomenons of the 21st century. Yes, designed by Jonathan Ive, working class. But that's not the purpose. I'm not saying now the working class is taken over and they're the ruling class. I'm demonstrating that society is made up of all classes, and we are all able to influence society. And social mobility exists now more than ever, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
Have you just read Richard Branson's Losing My Virginity and Business Construction?
No, I don't tend to partake into biased books, but thank you. Oh, he's a great guy. I'd love to meet him someday. Anyway, so maybe he can give me a lot of money. I don't know. But continuing on from there, let's go to my third point, ladies and gentlemen. If it is not class that impedes social mobility, then what are the issues? You see, ladies and gentlemen, I feel ashamed in many ways that we are so happy to use this cheap and lazy tactic of talking about class at every opportunity. There are far more divisive issues that we must be addressing, we must be really trying to fix, but it's hard for politicians, you see. Yes.
If we can get a microphone too. On your left.
Zach Hassan, Jesus College. Is the speaker completely ignorant of the divisiveness that comes from the poverty of opportunity, the poverty of being able to make choice, from being born to parents that maybe don't have enough money to send you to private school?
I thank you for that point, and I thank you for your eloquence in calling me ignorant. But I'd say it is you who is ignorant, my friend. And you know why? Because you cannot understand the premise of this debate. It's not about whether class is an issue. It still is an issue, but is it the overarching issue? And I'm saying that it is not. And it is your interpretation that is ignorant, my friend, and not me. But thank you very much. So, I say, what are the real issues? I say, number one, what about ethnic profiling, ladies and gentlemen? Why is that still an issue in social mobility when we're meant to be this transparent society? Secondly, what about ghettoization? We complain that we can't have assimilation in our multicultural melting pot of Britain, yet we allow ghettoization to occur without creating opportunities ourselves. Is that our excuse? But ghettoization exists, and it is something we need to address. But it's tough for politicians. These are divisive issues. They relate to being foreign and immigration. But above all, I'm ashamed to say, we give women the vote, yet now, in 2012, in the last 3 weeks, in the business pages, I learned that women, I don't learn it, I know it, but I read that women, despite their achievements, cannot be on an equal footing to men in terms of earnings or career progression, ladies and gentlemen.
That's true. When I worked at BT,
Sorry, would you like her to take the point? Then please continue.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, that is another point. But I lead to something beautiful about Britain. Britain has had insight into its failings in terms of class for a long time. And we've tried at every opportunity to bring down those barriers. Might not be perfect, but we are doing it. Whether it's hardship funds, whether it's bursaries, whether it's government investment in local communities, or charitable investment. We know the issues, and we are trying actively to bring the barriers down, ladies and gentlemen. No, I can hear you. Go on. So can you speak up? Can you speak up? I didn't hear you. Yes. No, but that's the very purpose. But that's the very purpose and premise of of my point. Class is an issue, but it's not the issue that runs Britain. That's what I'm trying to say, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Anyway, hello.
The speaker has chosen not to take the point.
Thank you very much. So, going on from there, I make another point. We've recognized the opportunities and we're creating them. But ladies and gentlemen, you can lead the horse to water, but you cannot make it drink. People, there must be the role of the individual when it comes to social mobility. And we live in an X-factor generation where people want to make the quick buck for minimum effort. Why don't we address that as an issue, ladies and gentlemen? What about the individual when it comes to social mobility? But I'll just touch on that point, and all I'll do is highlight it. So, ladies and gentlemen, what I've demonstrated today is that the premise of running or ruling does not work for 21st century Britain. I have demonstrated that. Secondly, the concept of class is the one from a bygone era that they are using and is not relevant to 21st century Britain. And therefore, the very premise of the proposition does not fit with 21st century Britain. And therefore, I say, in the immortal words of the O.J. Simpson trial, if the glove don't fit, you must acquit. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Support the opposition.
Thank you very much, SAIF. If I can ask that... If we could have your attention, please, we're going to continue the debate now. Just a quick reminder, if the speaker chooses not to take your point, please do wait for them to take the point. Don't try to speak over the speaker. First of all, people in other rooms can't hear you. Second of all, the speaker only has 10 minutes. Please respect that. Before we continue, Ken, I understand you need to leave early. Do you want to speak sooner, or are you willing to risk leaving a bit late? So you'll speak last? Okay. In that case, our next speaker for the proposition is Martha Morey, who is chair of Cambridge University Labour Club and is studying sociology. Please go ahead.
I do agree that society runs Britain. So, does class run Britain? Simply, yes. It's a fact as sure as does gravity exist, or should everyone hear us know. Class does run Britain. But it seems to be questionable. It's believed to be up for debate. And it is far from a foregone conclusion how you're going to vote tonight. Don't get me wrong, I'm very pleased it is voting tonight. As my long-suffering boyfriend will tell you, I do like arguing when I know I'm right from the outset. But yeah, it is the case that we're debating this motion tonight, and that demonstrates the subtle and pervasive way in which class does indeed run Britain. This is what I'm going to discuss with you. Not whether class runs Britain, but how it runs Britain. Now, class runs Britain in many ways, and many ways that are much more obvious and will probably win you over a lot easier. A class runs Britain politically, for example. Today, we are run by a cabinet where 50% or more are millionaires, were publicly educated, and all went to Oxford. Considering the average income in the UK is £21,000 a year, that only 7% of the population are privately educated, and that Oxford...
Is your microphone working? I'm sorry.
Oh, it turned. Yes?
I think she's on microphone 4. I'm just afraid people in the other rooms can't hear you. Could you try speaking it?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, if we could just ask you to take it. Sorry about that.
Probably because I went to a comprehensive and turned it off. I'm joking. Only 7% of the population are privately educated, and that Oxbridge is Oxbridge. It's clear A class rules Britain. Class also runs Britain through income inequality. Britain, as Daniel said, is one of the most unequal societies in the developed world, and it is an inequality that is growing today as it has done for the last couple of decades. This inequality facilitates hugely differentiated access to resources, living standards, education, healthcare, and many other things which enable class to run Britain. However, class also runs Britain in the way I'm going to discuss tonight, the indirect, invisible way that everyone participates in. It's how class runs Britain through culture. First of all, let me clarify what I mean by culture. I'm not going to talk in some snobby way about how the working class don't know the difference between Monet and Manet and so doom themselves to a lifetime of poverty. It's not necessarily true that working class people don't know art, or that knowing art guarantees you a lifetime of privilege. And knowing difference between the Monet and Manet is an essential prerequisite to middle class membership. After all, I certainly don't know, and I'm pretty sure I'm very middle class. What I'm talking about is our national culture. A culture that tells us we could all be middle class if we wanted to, and it's really your own fault if you're not. So you've no right to complain. It's a culture that obscures and causes the rigidity of our class structure. A culture that legitimizes inequality by pretending it is just and deserved. A culture based on the myth of meritocracy and the demonization of the working class. In many ways, this culture can actually be likened, believe it or not, to Harry Potter's invisibility cloak. A cultural cloak, if you'll have it, worn over the broad shoulders of British society, veiling the class system underneath. Anyone who's read the book or seen the films will know that it's a very useful cloak. Harry can do lots of things undetected, steal the ingredients for Polyjuice potion, and British society can do things that wouldn't otherwise be possible, because it can do them without being caught, hidden under the invisible cultural cloak. To explain my argument to you this evening, I'm basically going to talk about the two threads used to weave this cultural cloak. And the first is the myth of meritocracy, and the second, the demonisation of the working class. Meritocracy. The idea that those who work hardest and are the most talented will be rewarded justly. That where we start off in life will not determine where we end up. That we are the makers of our own future. And that the resulting Britain is a fair and just one. It is a Britain that we, not class, run. It is a lovely idea, and that's why it's so powerful, and why we're all so desperate to believe it. But is this the Britain we find ourselves in today? No, unfortunately it's not. It is not the Britain we find ourselves in today, because the theory of meritocracy is logically flawed. Imagine a society of 9 people, 1 owns a factory, 2 are the managers, the other 6 are the workers. The owner gets paid the most, then the managers, the workers at the bottom. Imagine, hypothetically, they all work exactly as hard as each other, they're as talented as each other. They should all be rewarded exactly the same. That is the logic of meritocracy. But this logic is flawed, because there are more opportunities at the bottom than there are at the top. No matter if they all work the same and have the same capabilities, the three workers have to remain at the bottom, unrewarded for their merit. Obviously, this is a completely theoretical argument, and we are not talking just about theory. We're talking about a very real Britain.
In reality, it is invariably the case that not everyone works equally hard, that everyone isn't equally talented at everything. So perhaps meritocracy can run Britain instead of class. Unfortunately not, because meritocratic theory has an inherent market logic that it assumes equal starting points, as is evident in the rhetoric of equality of opportunity. However, we do not all start off in the same place in life, so we do not get equal opportunities. In this hypothetical society I mentioned earlier, a worker who wants to become a manager has to work doubly hard and be doubly talented than the current manager to be able to move up. That is not a meritocracy, because the effort expended by the two competitors is not the same, but achieves the same results. In terms of how this is evidenced in Britain, I'd like to refer to a 2005 study published in The Observer, which showed that 5-year-olds whose parents earned more than £67,500 have reading skills 4 months more advanced than those peers whose parents earn between £15,000 and £30,000, and skills 5 months more advanced than those the peers whose parents earn between £2,500 and £15,000. Therefore, by the time we start school and the equality of opportunity begins, some individuals already have the odds stacked against them, requiring more work to reach the same point. We are told that class doesn't run Britain because we live in a meritocracy, which means that talent does instead. And the media perpetuates this belief by showing us tokenistic examples, like Sir Alan Sugar, like the people who Said mentioned, who started off with very little, but have been rewarded for their talents. However, to quote the cinematic masterpiece that is He's Just Not That Into You, we must remember those people are the exception and they are not the rule. So let's follow that meritocracy does indeed not exist, and class still does. But does that mean it has to run Britain? Could class membership not just be a fact about you, like your hair colour or your taste in music? A fact with little repercussion? Logically, yes. In Britain today, no. This is because of the increasing demonisation of the working class in the media, by politicians, by the middle class, and even by the working class. This pervasive and incessant dominisation started in earnest under Thatcher and has continued until today. And it is this that means class is not just another fact about you. It is a big determinant of your life, of everyone's life, and a determinant that, as a result, shapes and runs Britain. But what is this demonisation? Well, it stems from a shift in public attitudes that meant poverty and unemployment were no longer seen as social problems. They were personal and moral failings. That we would all be middle class now, as John Prescott and later Tony Blair said, as long as we aren't lazy and unambitious. This shift in social attitudes is reflected in the Social Attitude Survey, which in 2011 showed that support for the redistribution of wealth had fallen from over half at the time Thatcher left government to only a third in 2011. And that over half of people believed that unemployment benefits were too high, despite nearly 2.7 million people being out of work at exactly the same time. So people have become less sympathetic towards the working class, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're demonised. However, the misrepresentation of working class men and women in the media as being scrounging, benefit-cheating, work-shy criminal chavs does necessarily mean that the working class is being demonised. It is demonised to such an extent that many members of the working class do not want to be working class anymore, because it is increasingly a pejorative term, a term that could well describe the 8 million Britons who have manual jobs, the 8 million other Britons who are clerks, secretaries, sale assistants, and the 1.5 other million Britons who work in call centres for between £12,500 and £16,000 a year. I'll go into my conclusion now. The working class could be demonised, maybe, legitimately, if we lived in a meritocracy, because that would mean the working class reflected a group of people who chose not to participate in society to the same extent as everyone else. But this is not the case. And while we pretend that Britain is a meritocracy and that there is a legitimate reason to demonise whole swathes of the population so inaccurately, we are facilitating the growth of an increasingly unjust Britain. So I urge you to vote with the proposition tonight, and I do so with another Harry Potter metaphor because no one can vote against Harry. I urge you to whip out your Marauders map, find that invisibility cloak, rip it off, and help reveal the dangerous and unfair Britain run by class. Thank you.
That was magical. Thank you very much, Martha. To continue the debate for the opposition, we have Peter Saunders, who is a professor at Sussex University, spent 10 years working for think tanks in Australia, and now does independent research here in the UK. Peter, go ahead.
Thank you. About 40 years ago, an eminent professor of economics at the LSE, Peter Bauer, produced a little booklet, a little pamphlet called Class on the Brain. I was reminded of it listening to Danny just now. Danny actually wrote it down, said that in Britain our class system is unusual and much stronger than other countries have. That was exactly the puzzle that Bauer was addressing. He said, given that the evidence doesn't support that at all, why is it that our intellectual class and our cultural elites perpetuate this idea that Britain is an unusually class-divided, class-dominated, class-distorted society? I think Danny actually gave us the answer as well. My own answer to that is that we've still got a thin layer of monarchy and aristocracy at the very top of this society, and that we assume that that therefore, in a sense, symbolises the way the whole society works. Obviously, I don't have any opportunity to become the next King of England or the next Duke of Westminster, and therefore, we say, in some slip of logic, I don't have the opportunity, any opportunity at all. Martha said, workers, in her little example, have to remain at the bottom. The myth of meritocracy, I'm not surprised, Martha, you're doing sociology, by the way. 90%, there was a survey of sociology professors 5 or 6 years ago done by Shelley Halsey at Oxford, and he asked them about their politics. 90% of sociology professors said their politics were either left-wing or far left. There are 5 professors of sociology in this country.
Don't you think maybe that's what studying society in detail does to you?
No, I think... That's taken 25 seconds out of my time, just the applause for that absurd
You can have them back.
When actually the logic, of course, is the other way around. And it certainly didn't do that for me. I've studied sociology all my life. I was a professor, so I was one of the 5, that I was going to go on to say, who actually said that they might consider voting Conservative. That is not a balanced education you're getting if you subject yourself to a sociology degree in this country, unlike other countries. But let me come back to the point about class on the brain. It's perpetuated through... I sometimes wonder if our film industry is capable of making any movies other than movies about downtrodden working class people who are getting shafted by the government or the capitalist class, or on the other hand, snotty aristocrats lording it over Downton Abbey or whatever, and downtrodden the people below stairs. It's either EastEnders or Downton Abbey. This cultural perpetuation of this myth. It's perpetuated as well by our academics in the sociology departments for political reasons. And unfortunately, for the last few years, it's now being picked up by the political parties. And all 3 major political parties in this country are now buying into this idea that we've got a major social mobility problem. It started under Brown in 2008. He commissioned 3 reports in 3 years before that party lost office on what we're going to do about the social mobility problem. And the coalition has come in. They've announced that doing something about the social mobility problem is the primary social policy objective of this government, is doing something about the social mobility problem. They've appointed a social mobility czar. Alan Milburn, the former Labour cabinet minister, is now running this government's social mobility strategy. Alan Milburn, when he was appointed, went on the Today programme and spoke with John Humphreys. And at one point, and I nearly choked on my cornflakes when he said it, at one point he said, and I quote exactly, "Invariably, in this country, if you're born poor, you die poor." Let me give you the statistics from the Rowntree Foundation. The Rowntree Foundation, which is the major foundation that researches poverty in this country, will tell you that of children born to parents under the poverty line, 81% escape poverty in adulthood. 4 out of 5 kids born poor do not end up poor. But the man who's running this government's social mobility strategy thinks, invariably, if you're born poor, you die poor. Now, that is the class on the brain mentality. Was that an interruption? Yeah.
If we could get a microphone there.
20 seconds.
All right, sorry. Under your logic, unless vast amounts of rich people are suddenly become very poor, we should have no poor people in very few years. How does that happen? We should have loads of poor people. Surely that must be quite wrong?
No, it's not wrong. If you're born poor, according to the Roundtree Foundation figures, there is twice the likelihood of you ending up in poverty than if you're not born poor. So in other words, if people born to non-poor families, 90% don't end up poor. People born into poor families, 80% don't end up poor. Sorry, I can't. I'll engage with you later, all right? I can't. This is the trouble with trying to deal with statistics in a public debate. Nevertheless, and Danny warned that statistics are boring. You've got to get into a few statistics. Let me tell you, John Goldthorpe at Nuffield College, Oxford, who is this country's leading expert on social mobility, he's devoted his life to studying class and social mobility. He's a man of the left. He hates and detests me. But on this, we agree. On the facts, we agree. Goldthorpe says, divide the population into three classes. The routine manual workers at the bottom, so the top professional, administrative, managerial people at the top, and others in the intermediate class. More than half of us are in a different class from the one we were born into on that three-class model. It's more than that. There's movement down as well as up. That a third of the kids born into that manual working class make it into the top class. A third of the kids born into the professional class fail to stay there, despite all the apparent advantages that the sociology professors will tell you that they have. Am I being interrupted again? Yeah.
What is surely people in the lower class, to use that term, at any one point in time, are not people running through.
But their children are. Ken here is a living example. Like Dick Whittington, Ken has started off in humble circumstances somewhere in the London slums and rose to be Mayor of London. The proponents of the argument that we have a social mobility problem tell you this country's less mobile than other comparable countries. Danny referred to it, I think. It's not true. OECD report, 2007. Go and look it up. The OECD says we're about in the middle of the OECD countries. Sweden, Canada, Norway have slightly more mobility than we do. Germany, Ireland, Italy, France have slightly less. Broadly speaking, all these advanced countries look pretty similar, but if you want to distinguish them, we're round about the middle. People also say social mobility has been declining in this country. It's the Sutton Trust people again who have been driving so much. This is going to have to be the last one or I won't get through.
So is it, I mean, you're talking a lot about social mobility, which is fine, but is it not also important the distance from the top to the bottom, inequality in absolute terms, in that at any one point, the perception of the people at the top as being so far away from at the bottom or even from the rest
Let me tell you, I think there's an element of truth in it, but I think you're looking at it the wrong way up. I think that we do have a problem in this country, but the problem is at the very bottom. Some of you might have seen that speech that Michael Gove made 2 or 3 days ago, where he talked about children turning up at 5 to start school who can't tell the difference between a letter and a number, who can't speak in complete sentences, some of whom have not even been toilet trained such they're sent to school wearing nappies. That's where our problem is. I'm not saying that every child born in this country has a good chance of success. I'm saying that the great majority do, and it doesn't matter too much whether you're born rich or you're born in the middle or you're born in a respectable working class family. But it does matter if you're born to parents who don't give a damn about you and who neglect you and who send you to school like that at the age of 5, who just park you in front of a television all day and don't give you any sort of nurturing. That matters. And no, I've said I can't take any more. And therefore, the kind of intervention that this government to say we've got to do something about the social mobility problem as its key social policy objective, the key social policy objective is at the other end. What this government's doing, its latest wheeze on social mobility, is to tell universities like this that you've got to stop taking so many kids from higher classes, you've got to take more kids from lower classes. The Institute of Fiscal Studies in London, the IFS, most respected think tank probably in this country, has looked at university admissions policies, and it says unambiguously, university admissions policies are completely, totally meritocratic. The universities take people at the age of 18, now whatever has gone into their capacities at the age of 18 we can argue about, but at the age of 18 they take the ones who are best at age 18, and this university takes the very best of those at age 18. And what the government's trying to do is to stop that. We're in Alice in Wonderland here. This government is trying to say to Oxford and Cambridge, you have meritocratic entry requirements. We are therefore going to introduce class quotas, which will stop it being meritocratic, in order to make it look more meritocratic. This is completely mad. The problem we've got is at the bottom. It's not at the top. The problem we've got is not that the professions and the top universities and businesses and so on are trying to keep bright people out. Of course they're not. Why would they?
Peter, if you could bring your speech to a close.
Why would a top university want to keep bright kids out simply because they came from working class backgrounds? Analyse it. It's absurd. If I was running a business, why would I want to keep you out just because you speak with a funny accent and you say Bath rather than Bath? I'm not going to keep you out. If you can come in and make me money and make my business hum, I'm going to appoint you.
Peter, if you could please bring your speech to a close.
The problem is people at the bottom, a small stratum of people at the bottom who are desperate. I live in Hastings. I see some of this. Hastings has got a lot of problems. I see some of these people. I was in a supermarket a couple of months ago and I saw a woman clump her child round the head with a closed fist. And I thought then, I can't stand here in front of an audience and say we live in a perfectly meritocratic society when I've seen that go on with a 2-year-old. But that isn't. You're not going to solve that by telling Oxford and Cambridge to change their entry requirements. You're going to solve that through intensive intervention in those households to try and do something about this wretched parenting that those kids are getting. So, to wind up, does class run Britain? No, it doesn't. But I think what worries me is that the people who are teaching you, the educational elites, the cultural elites who are making all our movies and all our television productions, the political elites now of all three political parties have got it in their heads. They've got class on the brain. They've got it in their heads that class is a problem, that we don't have any social mobility. The evidence is that we do. We've got extensive social mobility. 50%, more than 50% of people ending up in a different class than the one they started out from.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, your time is elapsed.
Oppose the motion.
Now is your chance, members of the audience, to have your say. Wait with your hands, wait with your hands. There's announcements to be made. We will be taking speeches in the order of proposition, opposition, and abstention. Speeches will be 1 minute and 1 minute only, not 1 minute and 20 seconds, not 2 minutes. There'll be 1 minute. Alex will keep time and I will start interrupting you. When you speak, please wait for a microphone. Once you're called on, I know you'll be excited. There are people in other rooms who won't hear you otherwise. Furthermore, if you're in another room, don't forget you can always tweet at Cambridge Union, hashtag PIP, PIO, PIA, depending on your point. And if we sort of have a dearth of points down here, I'll take yours. Just one further point before I do open it up to points from the floor, and that is, I know some of you are very eager to speak, but just please do respect the other members of the audience here. Some people here have not spoken before in such a large room. It can be nervous. Please give these people a chance as well. You don't have to have spoken in a chamber like this. You don't have to be an expert on politics. You don't have to be an expert on sociology to have something to say. If you have something to say, please feel comfortable saying it. And on the same token, if you do want to get up and speak, please, as I said, respect your fellow audience members. And please respect their perspectives. Now, on that note, is there a 1 minute speech in proposition of the motion? I'm going to start with the gallery. I see this gentleman over here. Can we get a microphone up here, please? If you could please begin with your name and college.
Toby Crisford, King's College.
A lot of the debate so far seems to have focused on social mobility, but as some people touched upon, I don't think that's the main issue here. The point is not whether people can hop between different classes, but whether class still exists and Britain is divided into different classes, and whether one class runs Britain against the interests of the other class. And I think you only have to look at the makeup of Parliament to see that the answer to that question is undeniably yes.
Thank you very much. Is there a 1-minute speech in opposition of the motion? The motion is this House believes class runs Britain. Is there a 1-minute speech in opposition?
Hi, Robin Coleman, St John's College. Although I do find some of the arguments that the opposition has made thoroughly objectionable, I think that ultimately this motion has to be defeated for a very simple reason. And this is that essentially it's the people who let class run Britain who ultimately run Britain rather than class itself. It's all too easy to look at the people in powerful positions and say, oh, well, they're in the ruling class, middle class, upper class, but that's kind of tautological. In fact, it's the people who vote for them, it's the electorate, it's the shareholders who put them into powerful business positions who run Britain. And this is regrettable, but ultimately we can't just blame it on other people. We have to take some of the responsibility.
Thank you very much. Is there a 1-minute speech in abstention of the motion that you can't decide one way or the other, or you believe the audience should not? This gentleman over here.
Oliver Jackson, Christ's College. I'm going to abstain on this motion unless some of the final speakers can convince me otherwise for two main reasons. One is that so far the various speeches we've heard tonight have failed to address Britain's unique history, which is so instrumental in creating the class system that we see today. Britain has yet to have had a proper revolution, unlike the vast majority of countries around the world where the working class have risen up against the ruling class, and so this means that the history must be more properly addressed. But more importantly, there seems to be a slight confusion throughout this debate on whether class runs Britain, whether this is a fact, whether we're talking about here the public perception of the matter. The fact can be addressed most definitely through the statistics. The public perception, which I believe is much more important, is not so tangible, and for this reason I urge the rest of the gallery and the rest of the chamber to abstain. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there a 1-minute speech in proposition of the motion? Yes, back here, please.
Thank you. Sarah, Girton College. The last speaker in opposition, main speaker, spoke a lot about meritocracy, and I just thought we should consider how merit is created. And I think a lot of the reason people gain merit in society is because of the environment that they're in. So if we consider the different scenarios of a child in a private school and in a state school, I mean, to give an anecdotal example, my older brother was lucky enough to go to a quality private school, and my mum was telling me a story about how when he went to a private school and was in the first year, he was reading Greek myths in class. His friend who went to a state school, who was of the same age and in the same year, was writing, "One day I went to the zoo and I did this." If we then consider how Oxbridge takes half of its students from private school, noting that only 7% of the people in the UK are privately educated and 50% from state school, we have to consider why it is that that merit is so much higher that 7% become 50%. And then I think we have a different dimension on the question.
Thank you very much. Is there a 1-minute speech in opposition of the motion?
Yeah.
Yes, please. I'm sorry, I've asked for this speaker. If we could all please quiet down a moment. Thank you. Just wait until people are... Thank you.
Sophia Stanley, Darwin College. Whilst I'm left-leaning and brought up by a socialist, I'm going to have to agree with our second speaker from opposition. We all have found ourselves at Cambridge, and I'm sure we're quite proud of ourselves, that we've done quite well. It's an achievement in education. We come from varied backgrounds. I'm sure some of us have come from private schools, but some, like myself, will have come from state schools and other circumstances. I think the one thing that we'll all have in common, though, is education in my household was encouraged. My parents instilled that into me. My school did maybe a third of the work, but everything else came from the environment I was brought up with. And that's why I have to say, whether if you've got a caring parent or a caring family home, or someone that put some ambition or instill that into you, then you'll be fine. You can work hard, you can get to where you want in society. If you came from that bottom section of society where no one cared, no one gave you a hug in the morning, you were sent off to school without breakfast, maybe because your parents just simply couldn't afford it. But it's that lower section that is in trouble here. And we can't suddenly assume that the class rules Britain, when in fact we have a real problem on our hands with the lower section needing a lot of help because they're stuck there. Let's focus on that rather than talking about whether we have toffs in charge of us or not. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What side was that on? That was proposition. Oh, that was opposition. Okay. In that case, do we have a 1-minute speech in abstention of the motion? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Laura Weatherly, King's College. I wasn't going to abstain. I don't think I'm going to abstain. I actually have very clear views, but what I'm going to say is for the abstention. I think there are some really confused terms in this debate. I think different people in this room think class is a different thing. So I don't think we have a shared understanding of what we're talking about here. Because from my understanding of what that lady said, I would have said that was for the proposition. So I think we have to be clear. Are we talking about cultural class, i.e. the aristocracy, the manual working class, which as a concept I think has declined because of the change in our industry? Or are we talking about economic class, people with different levels of income, which still, I think, plays a really important role? And depending on which one we're talking about, we come up with a different answer, in my opinion. So if we're not clear, which I don't think we are, based on this debate so far, then we should abstain. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to take one more round, but before we do, there are plenty of people in other rooms and we haven't got any tweets yet. So if you're in another room, we have a tweet. I'm being told we have a tweet. I'm going to ask Chris to text me that tweet because I don't have it, and then I will read it off. But in the meanwhile, if we could take a 1-minute speech in proposition of the motion. Oh, difficult. Yes.
Hi, Oliver Hodgson, Trinity College. I'd just like to build on what you said just then, because I also agree with you that there's a lot of talking past each other in this debate, a lot of lack of definition about the ambit of what we're talking about. And that's why I welcomed, for example, the second speaker for the proposition's attempt to define the terms, whether we're talking about a more narrow sense in the sense of whether the political elite is classist, hence rules Britain, or whether a more broad sense that class pervades every aspect of British life. If we're talking about the latter, I'm not sure how many people in this room have had the same experience as me, but when I first arrived as a fresher, which school you went to was one of the first questions you were asked, sometimes even before your name. And I think that as Cambridge students, we're stigmatised with this elite reputation. The proposition also mentioned the demonisation of the working class. I think in order to win the debate, she didn't need to mention that. I think we should also be aware, though, whilst there is that, the demonisation also of the ruling class.
Your time is up, if you could just bring it to an end.
In the sense that we should not always demonise these people simply because of their class and judge them for the school they went to, and in a sense should be pleased that they went to the best educational institutions that this country can offer. Thank you
very much. Okay, we do actually have points from the other room, so I'm just going to read out 3 quick points, and then we'll take more floor speeches. We have a point in proposition by Jonathan Carr of Emmanuel. By coming to Cambridge, we become upper class. It gives us an advantage in whatever we do for the rest of our lives. We have a point in opposition from, I'm not quite sure whom. Class is still an issue, but it's not the overriding thing that rules Britain. It's lack of belief and ambition. And we have a point in abstention from Aislinn McDonough. We aren't debating social mobility. It's whether or not you have to be upper class to rule, born that class or not. We do have more points that I'll read after the next speaker. So, do we have a 1-minute speech in opposition of the motion? I'm going to choose this gentleman over here. Yes, please. If we could all quiet down so you can speak. Can you make sure the microphone's on? Just push the button on the side.
Brilliant. Jamal Hussain, St. Catherine's College. One problem I feel like we do have is we seem to demonise the upper class by saying that they are the problem, when in real terms it's the politicians. We shouldn't tell people that it's your problem for helping your child. And the fact that your child can read better than another child means that you're in the wrong. You should dumb your child down. No. What we should do is we should get a real government in place who can actually help those in the lower classes to raise them up. That's the real problem we have. Social mobility will not be fixed by demonising the upper class and trying to tell them to do badly, not to send their kids to good schools. What we should do is create good schools, create grammar schools, lift the ban on making grammar schools. Look at Germany, it's got better social mobility. And how do they do that? With a social system where you're allowed to have grammar schools.
Thank you very much. We now have a couple quick points from other rooms. We have a point in proposition from John X. Porter, who says, can we just appreciate the ridiculousness of claiming Cheryl Cole runs the country? We haven't got any points in opposition, but we do have a point in abstention from Natalie Walker. The problem is, whatever class you start off, once you're in charge, your perceived class changes. With that, we're going to take one more speech in abstention of the motion, and then we'll return to the normal round of speakers. So is there a 1-minute speech in abstention of the motion? There's a gentleman in the very back there on the window. Can you not sit there again, please? That's okay. You're there already.
I think an interesting point in all of this, because Cambridge has been brought up quite a lot, and the proportion of people who are here who would be higher class. But I think it's interesting that most of the people, the students probably here, would probably relate closer to the proposition and would probably be more left-leaning and more wanting to help the situation. So it seems odd that essentially the people who would be perceived as upper class are the ones essentially here who are going to be trying the hardest to do something about it.
Thank you very much. We're now going to return to the normal round of floor speech of main debate speakers. Just a quick point about abstention, about points of information, and that is just because yours might be the loudest voice does not mean that yours is the only voice in this room. Please respect, and I know I said that a few minutes ago, please respect the other people in this room and that they too have perspectives that need to be heard. Just because we can speak louder does not give us a better claim to having the floor. On that note, the closing speech for the proposition will be Ken Livingstone, former Mayor of London. Ken?
Well, thank you very much. Can I start by saying that we get confused in Britain when we talk about class. There's the Marxist definition of a very small elite who purchase labour and the vast majority who sell it. And that's tended to fall off the political discourse in recent years. And the more obsessed problem we have in Britain about differences between middle class and working class and chavs and all of that. I still actually adhere to that first definition. I can't think of any human society at any time in our recorded history that goes back 5,000 years to the earliest of the pharaohs, in which that society hasn't been divided by a small, rich and powerful elite and a vast mass largely without power and wealth. And all that changes through society is sometimes that elite is brutal and destructive, and at other times it's more conscious of the need to be fairer and to avoid strife in society. And we've seen that sort of shift in our own country over the last 50 or 60 years. And so there's nothing new. Yeah, go on.
If you could just wait for a microphone.
Pardon? What?
So which class were you in when you paid people to implement your policies as Mayor of London?
I was born into the working class. I then had an administrative role which gave me considerable power, but you will recall a lot of the Tory press always said basically I was a bit too common to be in that job, so it largely proves that point. The position is, when you come to look at it, that nothing has changed. I remember reading about 40 years ago and being absolutely overjoyed to read about the construction of the pyramids. And there's a general perception, if you've seen Hollywood films, that the pharaohs had all these slaves building the pyramids. Of course, this was a huge and technically difficult task, and the people building the pyramids were craftsmen. And I was delighted to discover at one point they all went on strike for an increase in their wages. Now that's 5,000 years ago. Nothing changes in human history. The simple division between those with wealth and power and those without. And we can look at more recent times, and in America, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Chief Justice Taney, warned against the unnecessary accumulation of power over persons and property in any hands. And no hands are less worthy to be trusted with it than those of a moneyed corporation. Well, bugger me, nothing's changed when you look at our recent banking crisis. That was 160 years ago. The same cycles go round and round and round. I think what I was lucky to be born into was a society where those divisions were dramatically reduced. And I think the main factor of that was basically World War II. In World War II, when Britain faced the possibility of extinction as a sovereign power by the greatest evil in human history, everyone really was in it together. And everyone did work for a common cause. And the captains that led working class, and by that I include middle class people as we define them now, the captains that led working class people into that titanic 6-year struggle came back from that war to run the country, to run the money corporations, to sit in the cabinet, aware of the courage and intelligence of the men, many of whom they'd led to their deaths. And in that, my generation, born in 1945 and the years afterwards, we grew up for 30 years governed by people who actually had a respect for that working class. What I've seen change in my lifetime with the coming to power of Margaret Thatcher has been a denigration of that, a demonisation of the working class, breaking the only real power working class people had other than the ballot box, which was the right to withdraw their labour in an industrial dispute. And the system's got worse. Many of you, I'm sure, have read the Spirit Level about the pattern of inequality in Britain. And the charts are quite clear. It peaks before the First World War. It comes down. Inequality in Britain is halved in the period that leads right the way through to the 1970s. And in just the 30 years since Thatcher came to power, we are back to the same levels of inequality that existed then. I was invoked as an example of what works, that I was the son of a window cleaner and my mother was a shop worker, and I ended up being Mayor of London. Well, ask yourself this: when I am dead, and John Prescott is dead, and Alan Johnson is dead, who at a high level in politics has not been through the route of university? And this is our problem. I came into politics, a large number of people who'd worked their way up I knew a large number of journalists, working class kids who dropped out of school, made tea at the local newspaper and swept the floor and slowly worked their way up to get to Fleet Street. What has happened in this last 30 years is the chance for working class kids to break through, to get to the top, has been dramatically reduced. I'm not aware of anyone in politics, except a handful of ageing old people like me, or in the media, who hasn't had that route. That 25% of people in Britain who've been lucky enough to go to university now almost exclusively control those positions, and way above them in a cabinet with, 18 millionaires, and even smaller elite trying to drive that agenda to make it even worse today. So I actually... Was that someone wanting to interject? Oh, yes.
Since we are at a university, probably a little bit biased, but I would have thought that the problem is less that the people who are running the country haven't been to university. Surely if they've been educated, I realise it's not the only route to doing well, but it's probably not a bad one. Surely the problem is not whether or not they've gone to university, but what background they've come from. If there are working class kids that have been able to get educated, if they've gone to university, I don't see that that's a problem, so long as they've worked in the real world as well. The problem is whether or not it's the working class kids that are getting to go to university if they deserve, when they deserve to do so.
Well, most probably less working class kids are going to go to university because they're more likely to be worried about the burden of debt they will now come out with. During that mayoral election, I did virtually every day a meeting in a local college somewhere in London. And the scale of concern that, yes, here's your way up and out of this, but it will mean you come out of university owing the best part of 30 grand. And as we know today, with many people having no great prospect of getting a job even after they've gone through university and got their degree. So that's my general view about the background. Then you have to ask, why is Britain so much worse than the others? I mean, as I say, inequality was much worse 100 years ago. It dramatically narrowed by the 1970s, and now we're back almost to the inequality we had before. More and more difficult for people to come through and break down those barriers. But it isn't as bad in France. It isn't as bad in the Netherlands. It isn't as bad in Sweden. Why is it and if you look at that spirit level book, looking at inequality, I mean, 3 countries stand out as the worst of the 23 major Western democracies: the United States of America, Portugal, and the United Kingdom. And therefore, I don't believe we will ever have a society where there's a complete distribution of power and wealth. That's wholly utopian. But we're getting worse, and other countries aren't. Other countries have made more of an effort to try and ensure their societies remain open. And I do think that is the legacy very much of Thatcher and Reagan, who felt we were drifting into some dreadful communist system, and it all had to be rolled back, and the unions had to be smashed, and people had to be put back in their place. And I don't want my kids growing up in a society like that. I want my kids to grow up having every opportunity they can get. And we do our best to give them that. But at the end of the day, there are many, many parents who now work 12-hour shifts, don't have that time. Things have got worse. We've been rolled back. And I don't want that for our society. I don't want it for my kids. I don't want it for anybody's kids. We have the ability to unleash everyone's potential if we actually have a fairer society. Instead, it's actually rolling backwards. And yours is the generation that's going to have to do something about it. Mine is the generation that's failed to drive that process forward. As I said earlier in my speech, it was that generation that came back from the Second World War, having seen the real courage and intelligence of working class men, that led to the most equal point in the history of Britain over 1,000 years of British history. And that doesn't have to be something that stays forever in reverse and going backwards. We've got the chance to stand up and say, in our society, everyone should have the right to achieve their full potential. And the blocks and the barriers being put in that way are absolutely something we must push aside. And finally, somebody asked about, well, voters elect the people that do all this. I have to say this as well. I think the coverage and bias in our newspapers is infinitely worse than it was. When you've got 80% of the papers that people read owned by 4 billionaires, all of whom are tax exiles and pay bugger all to our country, I don't think they will be giving a fair opportunity for those people like me to challenge that system and propose an alternative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ronnie. Old bloke behind you trying to bring up your tax stuff.
Yes, yes.
Well, I'm not very good at it, I have to say.
Thank you very much, Ken. To close off the debate tonight, we have in opposition Peter Hamilton, who is the headmaster of Haberdasher Aske's boys' school in Elstree, North London. Peter, go ahead. You have 10 minutes.
Position today. I have to say, I hope I can inject a tone of realism and common sense into this debate. I've never heard such a wishy-washy proposition. We have not had this motion defined properly. I'm going to try and help you to do this. I'm going to show you in opposition that this is not about some evil axis of tribalist snobbery. That lives on in the collective conscience of the left and the Labour Party, that bogeyman class that is bereft of modern relevance in this world. That is demagogic tripe. There are two things that are incontrovertible in this debate. Number one, no thank you, sir, politics runs Britain. And number two, wealth, money, ingenuity, innovation, education. Yes, they run this great country. And we in opposition say quite clearly, we live in a meritocracy nowadays and not in some 19th century Marxist sweatshop. Who does? No thank you, madam. Who does run Britain? Alan Sugar does. Richard Branson does. Wayne Rooney does. David Cameron tries. Nick Clegg tries sometimes. Ken Livingstone does not run Britain, nor does Ed Miliband. Boris, however, might. Where are the centres of power in this country? They're not in country estates, but they're in Primrose Hill, they're in Hampstead, they're in Mayfair, they're in Islington, where many of the Labour Party live. They're in Monaco, they're in Canary Wharf. Who influences us? Not those toffee-nosed aristos, no, but it's the footballers, the musicians, the film stars, the cars they drive, the objects they own, the clothes they wear, the relationships they have, the schools they send their children to. That's what influences this country. Modern Great Britain is not Downton Abbey, and it is certainly not EastEnders. Everything is blurred. Footballers can drive Bentley today, page 3 girls can wear Prada, if they're wearing anything at all. Bottles of crystal going for £1,000 a bottle? Well, no, it's not the aristocrats, that's just chavvy. Money and wealth rules. No, thank you. Politics. Well, I thought that this was a democracy and MPs run Britain, or perhaps it's civil servants, perhaps it's the journalists, perhaps it's the Sun, perhaps it's the BBC, perhaps they run Britain. They certainly dictate what we watch, what we like, what we support, and sometimes they cut across cultural advice. They set the agenda, not a coterie of toffs. But wouldn't it be nice to believe that? Wouldn't that be so much more comfortable for you all in this house? No, it's a wealthy and a political elite that run us, not a nation of toffs. And all parties are guilty. We had those champagne socialists, Blair and Brown. We now have the effete Tories and the Lib Dems. It's their links, their contacts, their education, their intelligence, not class at all, no thank you, sir, that runs Britain. And I'm going to be very honest with you, total honesty, ladies and gentlemen of the House. There is no precise correlation with class and wealth. There is no precise correlation with class and political power. And we in opposition say that is a very good thing. Let me expand. Lest you think that I am some toff myself, because I happen to be the head of an extremely good private school, and I happen to have worked in a number of very good private schools. I'm not here representing a class-ridden society or a group. I was born in Southampton. My father was a merchant seaman. My mother was a shop assistant. I went to grammar school. I went to Oxford. That's social mobility in action, and that is absolute total proof that we are not a class-ridden society. It's the power of education that liberates. Let me tell you, no thank you, not yet, sir. Let me tell you Let me tell you a little bit of the world I know, the school that I run. We spend up to £1 million a year on bursary help. We help people who could not afford to come to our school. And we change lives, and all independent schools do that. Philanthropy and endowment. No, thank you. Philanthropy and endowment. We want the best and the brightest. It's got nothing to do with class. No thank you. I don't have time for a show of hands here, but I bet 50% of you here are privately educated, and that therefore means that 50% are from the maintained sector. Many of you have benefited from philanthropic support. But school does not make you upper class. University, even Cambridge, does not make you upper class. What it does do is lavish an outstanding education on you. An astounding education, which you can, if you wish, use in the service of others. It lavishes responsibility. Yes, I will take you, sir. Do stand up.
Can we just wait for a microphone to get to him?
Thank you. You don't seem to have any real definition of what class is. If it's not money, education, well, is it only specifically parents who happen to come... is it just your parents? Is that the only way you define class? Because I think wealth and education certainly counts.
Wealth and education got nothing to do with class, so thank you so much for helping me out tonight. Do sit down. Nothing to do with it. This
Could
class,
you define it?
very, very simply, has been defined quite clearly by the proposition as the toffs. Right. We're now going to move on to private schools. We, by the way, are on the side of good. We are the good side. We're nice people to do business with. This is what we believe in. Aspiration, inspiration, ambition, integrity, responsibility. We do not believe in low expectation. We do not believe in social engineering. We certainly don't believe in limiting access to university. We believe in quality of teaching and learning. We believe in access for all who can benefit. No, thank you, sir. All who can benefit from a selective invocation. Bursaries, and we give many of them, cut across all ethnic, racial and religious divides. That is important. Having every language, colour under the sun, united by the pursuit of excellence. That is the real meritocracy in Great Britain today. And that is the power of education which transforms... Yes, I will take you, so please stand up.
How much do you charge a term?
How much do I charge a term? Yeah. We charge £15,000 a year. You can do the maths yourself. Thank you very much. Power of education to... And by the way, that's cheap. Power of education to transform lives. Yes, it is. And you can also come to us on a free place. The power of education to transform lives, to make the world, Great Britain, a bigger, better and bolder place. And we in opposition can have no truck with the proposition's misguided, outdated, medieval, partial view of Great Britain as it is today. We believe in social change. And I've told you...
Point of information.
No, thank you. We believe in social change. What have we told you? We have told you that wealth runs Britain, that politics runs Britain. House of Lords. Savagely castrated. I could have mentioned also the impotence of our own hobbled royal family, but time is short. They don't run Britain. I could have mentioned Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, all free from class interference and run by political and financial elites, but not by class. No, thank you, sir. Sit down. I want to conclude. Have I got time? 2 minutes, thank you. 2 minutes, that's wonderful. The proposition today has put forward a very naive, inaccurate, outdated view of this great and grand country. And they do this to frighten you all. Who was that? Yes, please stand up. I'll take you now.
If we could...
You keep saying that the proposition is arguing this on the basis that toffs run Britain, but Ken Livingstone just clearly said that it was a case of an economic elite that was in control and went back to the previous Marxist definition. So you're misleading the debate here.
No, I don't think so. Thank you again for that intervention, but that's not what I heard. The proposition puts forward a naive, inaccurate and outdated view of modern Britain. They do this to frighten the people. They tell scary tales which only reflect the emptiness, the wild emptiness of their own dogma. The proposition are negative and pessimistic. The opposition is positive, optimistic, and above all, no thank you, sir, and above all, realistic. They, no thank you, sir, they would rid you of the belief that education transforms lives. They would mire you in low expectation and a lack of achievement, despite all the evidence to the contrary. I do hope, ladies and gentlemen of the House, that is not the world that you want. So do not let the proposition beguile you tonight. Do not let them fool you. We say politics runs Britain, that is not susceptible to class. We say wealth and money run Britain, that is not susceptible to class. It's no indicator of class. We say we live in a meritocracy, that is a good thing. We say Britain is run by wealth, by politics, and one day, ladies and gentlemen, it will be run by you, and that will have nothing to do with class. And our deepest hope is that it will be run with compassion. And that is why I ask you all to join us in standing proudly in opposition. We beg to oppose. Thank you. Well, that woke a few up anyway.
Thank you very much for that. Before everyone leaves, just a few quick announcements. I know we're all in a rush to get out and vote. The way we will be voting, as we traditionally do, is with our feet. The doors through which you leave down here are significant. Eyes through the right, nose through the left, abstentions down the middle. Upstairs you'll be voting on the way out. If you could please stay in your seats just a quick moment. While the speakers and officers leave first, you will have an opportunity to meet the speakers in the bar after the debate, so no need to rush now. Just two quick announcements about upcoming things. One, if you're interested in helping out with AV, with microphones, videos, and that sort of thing, Daniel Hyman, our head of AV, will be running a workshop right now after the debate, if you'd like to find out. Also, tickets are on sale at the bar for Oktoberfest. It's this Saturday. Tickets include a free pretzel, free bratwurst, free beer, and we've got an Oompa band, so really can't beat that. Tickets on sale in the bar. We've got some great events Sunday, Rupert Everett. The rest is in the term card. If you could please let the officers and speakers leave first, and then vote through the doors.